Yesterday on the programme, we brought you news about an illegal and potent new drug known as monkey dust on the streets, which has been causing havoc in Stoke, with a prediction that it's going to spread to other parts of the country because it's so cheap, with a street price of around £2. It's a white powder that can be smoked or injected. Monkey dust can make users feel that they have superhuman strength and no fear. It's seen some climbing buildings and jumping off and running into traffic. It also causes psychosis and paranoia. We brought you an exclusive interview with one user who calls himself Smithy.
It's just like crack, but better. Yeah. You feel like, when it's good stuff, you feel like doing stuff, like getting things done and energetic and that.
Why do people like the effects of it so much?
I don't know. I hate the fact that I like it. I hate it every time I have it, but I still have it.
And how cheap is it?
Because it's everywhere. Like, say if you've got another addiction, like alcohol or something, if somebody's like smoking that around you, you'd smoke that just to stop you battling through the heroin or alcohol or whatever. Because it's there, you know what I mean? And there's just that many people on it.
Also on our programme yesterday, we heard calls for the drug to be reclassified from Class B to a Class A substance, meaning dealers could face life imprisonment. The government told us that any decision on reclassification will be down to advice from an independent group that guides the government on drugs policy. We'll talk to a member of that group in just a moment. First, here's Paula Rees from UCAT, the UK Addiction Treatment Centres, calling for the classification of monkey dust to be upgraded.
We're looking for it to become a Class A, you know, so it hammers home really the horrific nature and the effects of this drug.
So to upgrade it from a Class B drug to a Class A drug, so on a similar level to heroin?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it seems to me that people are getting hooked from their first use. And then there's no going back, you know, and it's just creating havoc, much like Spice did in Manchester.
So should monkey dust be made a Class A drug, and how would that happen? Let's ask Dr. Derek Tracy, who sits on the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs. That's the group that advises the government on drugs policy. Also with us, Professor David Nutt, who used to chair the group and wants to scrap our drugs laws and instead replace them with a regulated market so people know what they are taking. And in Glasgow, Professor Neil McKegney. He set up and is the director of the Drug Misuse Research Centre at the University of Glasgow. Dr. Tracy, first of all, your reaction to the harm that monkey dust can do?
It looks dreadful. I mean, looking at the story of that man Smithy, it's really sad to see it. I think it seems to be a very localised problem at the moment. It's hard to know how wide that's going to spread, but it's causing huge harm to some people.
Explain to our audience what would trigger your group reviewing a drugs classification.
I should say I'm speaking in a personal capacity, although I'm a member of the ACMD. I'm not speaking for the ACMD. We are answerable to the Home Office and to the Home Secretary, so the Home Secretary can commission work from us and ask us to explore the classification of drugs or other types of harms.
But the initiative would come from the Home Secretary?
It would typically come from the Home Secretary. The ACMD can self-generate work. Some of it's legislative, some of it's looking at types of harms that drugs can cause.
Does the class of a drug, in your view, have an impact on its use?
No, and I don't...
You're emphatic about that?
Yes, I feel quite strongly about that, and again, this is a personal opinion. I don't believe that reclassifying monkey dust or MDPV or MDPHP, this class of cathinones, to Class A is going to make a difference, because I don't think Smithy or those people taking those drugs are taking it because it's Class B. If it was upgraded Class A, it would attract a higher sentence. But I don't think that's in people's minds when they're taking drugs. If the aim is to reduce use, I don't think that's an effective strategy. And I don't believe we can legislate our way out of drug harms.
Professor Nutt, you used to sit on the group that yes. Derek Tracy now sits on. Do you agree with him on that?
Very much so, yes. Classification system is an extremely inefficient, probably counterproductive way of trying to control the harms of drugs. We should scrap it and do something much more innovative and novel.
Well, I mean, you would end prohibition, you would regulate drugs so there was a market, people would know what they were taking. Does that mean you would allow people in your world to take monkey dust?
Not at all, no. I don't think there should be a free market in all drugs. I just think there should be access for some people to drugs which are safer than drugs that they're currently taking. Why does monkey dust exist? Because 2 years ago we brought in a thing called the Psychoactive Substances Act, which eliminated head shops. In Stoke and other northern towns, a very weak cathinone was being sold called Bubbles, or it was actually methiopropamine. People were using that for decades, not coming to any harm. But there was hysteria about legal highs, so all legal highs were banned. And just as we predicted, once you ban everything, people go for the more potent, the more expensive, and the more valuable. And that's why we didn't have this drug until we brought in the Psychoactive Substances Act.
But wouldn't reclassification it would generate a lot of publicity, it would send out a severe message, as Paula Rees put it, to people tempted to take it, that it could do a lot of harm?
I disagree. I'm not aware of many instances where classification has put people off taking drugs. I think curiosity about taking things that alter our mind is part of the human condition. Some people do it. I think it's a healthcare issue and a societal issue.
Professor Nutt, when you were on the advisory group, you did support making ketamine illegal. So right. You do think controlling drugs is appropriate in some cases?
Yes, I think I'm completely in favour of controlling drugs. The question is how we control them. We shouldn't control them in the way we are at present, which is saying drugs are bad, let's try to police our way out of people's using them.
Sure, but on the ketamine example, you supported making that illegal?
I did. I thought it should have been controlled as a Class C drug then, yes.
Right. Neil, can I bring you in, please? Do you see a case for moving monkey dust up to a Class A substance?
Well, I think it's certainly worth looking at. However, I find it surprising that you have a member of the current ACMD, which advises on classification, telling them, the viewers, that he doesn't see any impact flowing from that in terms of use. Actually, you know, when, as David Nutt referred to the so-called legal highs, when they were made illegal, the number of deaths associated with those has actually halved. So that's the clearest example that actually legislation and classification of these substances can well have a beneficial impact on the rate of adverse consequences flow from use. But I think we have to understand too that these laws relate to the people who don't use these substances as much as the ones who choose to use them. And I do think classification sends out a really strong signal and influences those who choose not to use the most harmful substances. And as a result, heroin use is much less prevalent than cannabis use, much less prevalent than alcohol use. So penalties, classification is an important part of our policies and the ways of dealing with these substances.
How do you respond, Derek Tracy, to that example of the halving of the number of deaths from legal highs after they were made illegal?
I'd say a couple of points. Once again, although I'm a member of the ACMD, I'm not speaking for ACMD policy, I'm talking about personal opinion. I think causally linking changes in legislation and changes in harm is very, very complex, and I would think that's quite a challengeable position to say that that has directly led to the changes and harms. I think we're looking at...
What else could be the explanation?
I think there are lots of different things affect drug use. Why is there suddenly this spike of that drug, monkey dust, in this city? I don't think there could be a legislative answer that suddenly appeared in a particular town. I think drug use is quite complex. To approach it from a policing or a legislative point of view is absolutely the wrong way to look at it. I've never met a police officer who thought this is the right thing for them to be doing. I think there are issues about people pushing drugs. I think these are causing huge problems, but we need to see this as a social issue. We need to see this as a wider healthcare issue. That drug is being sold for £2 a go. That's cheaper than a pint of beer. This is really tragic. To take that on as a point of law is not the correct focus for this. It's a healthcare issue.
Neil, it's a healthcare issue, and perhaps regulating the market in the way that Professor Nutt suggests would reduce the likelihood of people taking new, potent and unknown substances like monkey dust.
That's a gross oversimplification. Nobody is suggesting that this drug use should be responded to solely as a police issue. You know, saying it should be treated as a health issue solely is rather akin to saying we should deal with burglary by employing more joiners to rebuild people's front doors. Those skills are necessary, but we need something to actually discourage use, and that's where the legal framework comes in. It actively discourages use. Yes, we need health services to respond where people get into difficulty. However, we need strong, vigorous enforcement action to reduce the availability of these substances. Because availability is the strongest predictor of use. That is unquestioned. If drugs are available, they will be used. And the enforcement stance is one way of reducing availability. It's not the only answer. I don't think anybody would suggest it is, but it is an important part of how we respond to drug policies in this country and indeed every other country.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Neil McKegney from the Drug Misuse Research Centre. Professor David Nutt, who used to chair the independent group that advises the government on drugs policy, and Dr. Derek Tracy, who sits on it right now. Thank you very much for your contributions this morning.